Hello friends I made this for. Today is part one of an ongoing series that I hope to do. This series is one that I've been wanting to do for a really long time, and we're starting today with the Wayhome Tarot. So I've looked online and I haven't seen a lot of videos reviewing particular decks that are indie. There's a lot of reviews on collections that people might have, but looking and diving into a specific deck, specifically indie decks, I haven't really seen. So regardless of the pimples on my face, I thought today's the day. Let's see if this works out and I can get through this in one foul swoop. So before I get into this indie deck review, there are a few things I want to go over. One, I'm not going to be rating this deck on the quality of the cardstock or the box that it comes in, because to me, that's not the most important thing. The time and energy definitely goes into that as far as finding a supplier and a printer to work with. To me, what's most important is the art. The quality of the art, the consistency of the art, is their representation in the art, and does the art bring anything different to the lineage of tarot? So with that said, that's what I'm going to be doing my point system on. Now, what is my point system? It's going to be a 1 out of 10. So 10 being the best and 1 being probably not possible. Honestly, because anybody who makes a deck has put a lot of time and energy into it. There are 78 cards in a normal deck, a typical tarot deck. So this is not from lack of effort from any artist. I don't think any artist who gets into making a tarot deck ever goes in with trying to lazily put together a deck, right? So whenever I do a deck review, and hopefully there will be more after this one, it's going to be with the intention that we're looking at these decks to reflect on what maybe they could have done a little differently from my personal standpoint, and of course, what cool things they bring to the table, because every deck seems to bring its own interpretation on this really old lineage, right? So with that said, that's where I'm coming from as far as someone looking at decks, as one who reads as well as someone who's working on their own deck. So with that said, let's get into the meat and potatoes, right? The deck I'm talking about today is the Wayhome Tarot, and I will talk briefly about the packaging that it comes in because that is important, but it's not going to be what I'm grading on. So this is the package. The box is actually really good quality and it fits very snugly together. So this is what it looks like closed. And it's the kind of box that you could put the deck in your purse and it's not that easy to separate. So you could throw it in your purse or your bag and it wouldn't just open up and you would have all your cards willy-nilly falling all over the place, right? I appreciate that in any box, that it be secure and it also be pretty sturdy. It's at least sturdier than maybe some boxes that might fall apart with a little wear and tear. This one, definitely not going to fall apart on you. It's going to stay together pretty securely and it's going to keep its shape. As you can see, this has a nice little keyhole in the front. This is the same sort of art that's on the backs of the card, minus the keyhole in the very center. So something to note with the Wayhome Tarot is that this deck doesn't come with a booklet, and that to me is not a problem. In fact, I don't usually use the booklet for card decks. It's nice if you're just getting into a deck or just into tarot to have that little bit of information in there, but it not having it is not going to affect my overall score or my view of this deck. To me personally, a deck should be easy to read without a book. It should be easy to read even if you're fairly new to tarot. And by easy to read, I don't mean tarot is naturally easy, right? A lot of decks have obscure imagery or just not a lot of information going on. I prefer decks that show me more context or just more visuals to include what might be the language being used. And of course, if certain cards are simpler because they have a simpler meaning, I can totally understand that. However, I want my deck that I'm using to give me some good input or some context clues when I'm looking at these stories in each card. Which, yes, I believe each card is kind of a story, right? So if it's going to be giving me any context, that matters to me, right? So that's a personal thing. Also for me, representation is really important. And I'm going to go over all of those when I go over it. But the way I'm scoring is representation, art style, is it consistent? Representation, is there a variety of people or are they all white idealized forms, right? Do they have people that might be of different body shapes and skin tones? Is there maybe even someone who is different as far as accessibility, right? Is there that representation that's different, that includes more people? That's important to me as a reader, as well as the easy to read aspect. Does it bring imagery that really creates the story that we can understand and make sense of, or is it vague imagery that just assumes that you've studied tarot for decades, right? I'm not as big on the vague stuff personally. So I'm also going to give an extra point if the art in the book, or I mean rather the cards, expands upon the knowledge of tarot and brings something new. So representation, art style, and easy to read are all 3 points apiece. So hopefully a deck will get all 9. And it can be a 10 out of 10 if it gets all 9 points and then that extra one at the end. However, the deck I'm sharing today, the Wayhome Tarot, I'm going to just say right now, is not a bad deck. It does get a lot of points for its work, but it's not perfect, and we'll talk about why. But overall, I really love this deck, and I'm going to tell you more as to why that is. So when it comes to representation, what's actually really nice about this deck is that most of the cards don't have any people. And I do like that because it allows you to put yourself or anyone in the deck, right? We see here some good representation. It's mostly natural, and the representation is mostly animal or plant or space, which is nice because we can interpret this as being more of an energetic thing than anything else. Also, the good point about that is it doesn't exclude anyone who might be looking at this deck and looking at it for context. In fact, I feel like the animals help it be more open. However, there are people in the deck, and the deck has, I would say, it's a mixed bag, right? When it comes to representation, I gave this deck a 2, only because the people who are represented, and you'll see in just a second, kind of have this openness. You can kind of imprint yourself onto these people. And this is, of course, only the court cards. The court cards are the only cards that have any people in them. And there's an aspect of it that I really like, but there's an aspect I have an issue with. And you might be able to tell right away what the issue is. So far, they're all able-bodied people with idealized forms, right? They all have a more muscular and fit figure. This one is the only one that seems like perhaps this person is of a different ethnicity. Of course, there's no ethnicity anywhere because it's just the forms of the people. But where I get my issue and why it's not a 3 is because all these people follow this idealized shape. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If this doesn't bother you, clearly I'm the issue, and that's fine. But the thigh gap, is it really necessary? I get the meaning behind it, but I also, as someone who wants to see representation, different body types, different body looks, when you see something that's mostly idealized over and over and over again, it just kind of lacks that representation for me. It's, okay, there's somewhat representation. We see the fact that people can be imprinted upon on these people. It's clearly not just all women or all men, but, I mean, it is all women or all men, right? But there just is something that is like, it's not bad, but I could see it be pushed more. I could see there be more representation here. More variety in the body styles, more of that would give me a better impression of representation. But 2 is still not very bad. In fact, I really came close to giving it a 2.5 for that, but I just thought, because there's not that much representation, even from the shapes of these people, 2 is fine. It's not that it's exclusive or it makes you feel bad necessarily, but if we are in this idea of expanding the tarot, I also would have liked if they maybe came up with a different wording besides father, daughter, mother, things like that, because I think those are archetypes that we can evolve out of. Now, if you feel differently or you're like, wow, this looks amazing, what are you talking about? Completely fair. My opinion's going to be different than yours. But with that said, this is actually a really great deck to read. And let's talk about art style. Or actually, let's dive into easy to read. Is it easy to read? So it might not be the easiest to read for everyone, but I would say that this is actually a really great one if you haven't read before. There's a lot of really powerful imagery here that I think does a good job making this deck fairly easy to understand as far as what can we take from these cards? 10 of Wands. This is a great representation. I think this card really captures what the 10 of Wands is, even if it's a different if it's a different image, you know? Usually it's the guy holding a bundle of sticks, and here we see all these matches burnt out. And that represents exactly the vibe for 10 of Wands. So for easy to read, I gave it a 3 out of 3 because yes, as a person who reads, I find it easy to read. But if you were new to tarot, if you've never had a tarot deck before, sitting with these cards would actually probably help you out a lot. Like the Hanged Man or the Hanged One, if you're like me and you like to be more of that type of person. This cocoon actually does a great job illustrating what the card represents, right? And there's this connection in the aces, this connection to the flows, these different elements in their purest forms. And I love that representation here. I love the designs for these. So is it easy to read? I would say yes. Honestly, you're going to learn a lot from this deck. And I wanted to let it be known now that this deck definitely got an extra point for originality. It earned that other point that it didn't get in representation. And does it add anything new to the tarot? Because I think yes. Halfway. It got half a point for me, actually. Because there is this connection to some really good imagery, right? The Hierophant as the mushroom. Can we just talk about the Hierophant as the mushroom? All day, every day, y'all. This card is perfect for this image. It's absolutely perfect. The Hermit, also really great. As far as what this card represents, the medicine that we can get from this card does a great job. Now, let me back up and say, I gave it half a point for that effort. Why only half? Well, because there's definitely some cards that I feel like don't add to the conversation or to the originality, such as the Emperor. This card just reminds me a whole lot of the Wayhome, or not the Wayhome, the Wild Unknown Tarot. The Wild Unknown Tarot has a very similar image for both the Emperor and the Empress. And to me, like, I get that they added the brain down here to kind of like bring home this idea of stability and this reasoning of the mind and that sort of strength. But because it's literally almost the exact same tree, and of course, like I said, it's an evolution of what's already there, right? That's what all these cards are. It's just an evolution of what's already out there. But because this felt like really similar to me, I just decided the half point was good. Honestly, it's not to say that this person took an idea, because when it comes to tarot, we all have similar imagery that we use, right? But it's things like that that made me go half point, not whole point. Of course, that's a very minor thing. And there's only a few cards that I feel like, excuse me, do not add to the conversation of this deck. Which brings me to art style. Art style for me was a 2.5. And I'm going to be very picky about art style because, one, I'm an artist. But also there were some things, and this relates to why it was a 0.5 and not a 1, a whole point, is there's some interesting inconsistencies with style too. When we look at 3 of Cups, we see the oyster and we see the pearls, and the pearls kind of seem out of place to me, if I'm being honest. They kind of have the look of being from a different deck. There's also this inconsistency from cards like this that fill the whole card versus not filling the whole card. These 2 cards actually don't look like they're from the same deck to me. And that's why I kind of gave it a 2.5 rather than a solid 3. Because there's a lot of good art in this deck. Is it in every card? Not for me. But that's okay, because that's a personal preference, right? This is 7 of Cups, and this feels like it was a picture that was drawn and then kind of like warped. I'm not sure. I'm not really crazy about this one. I get the idea, and I do think it builds on the themes of 7 of Cups pretty well. But do I feel like it's a really consistent design with everything else? No, because I don't see anything like this really around in the deck. So that's kind of me being picky. And again, some cards I just don't get. Not a huge fan of the devil in this deck. Don't really understand it. I mean, I do. What controls us, what keeps us in a space where we're not thinking for ourselves, I think is what that's related to. But things like temperance, I've definitely used this card in other like astrology talks, but I'm going to be honest, this temperance is not the most reflective of what this card can signify and what kind of energy we can get out of it, what kind of magic we can unlock. And, you know, sun is sun. Very sun-like. But with that said, it's still a 2.5 for me because this deck has a lot going for it. There's a lot of beautiful imagery in it. We can see this 5 of Swords is really beautiful. 8 of Cups, really interesting, right? But is it consistent all the way through? I don't know. Some of these cards just feel out of place or not in the same style. And that like goes between these 2. It's not that they're completely unconnected. I actually like the tower in this one. What a nightmare, right? That would be like the worst case scenario going camping. But it kind of just is one of those things that there's a few stylistic things that I don't really vibe with. But that's okay. And I think that's really, it's about personal preference. So would I recommend this deck? Absolutely. This deck is an 8 out of 10 for me. So it's a really good deck. If you're just starting to read tarot and you want to pick up an indie deck as your first deck, get this one. It's not necessarily perfect, like I said. There are certain ideologies, this whole Father of Cups, Son of Pentacles, like that sort of thing that I'm not super crazy about. But If you're just starting to read or you're just starting to get into it, you want a deck of your own, which, by the way, I'll talk about picking your own decks for yourself. And yes, you can pick your own deck. You don't have to be gifted it. That's a load of malarkey. Buy yourself a deck because you deserve it, babe. So, with that said, I hope this review was helpful for you. As I said, whoever designed these cards put a lot of time, a lot of effort. So as I give this feedback, it's not to denounce or even say that this person did something wrong. I think this deck is amazing, especially with what it brings in certain not court cards, but in certain cards such as the Hermit, the Hierophant. There's certain major arcana cards that really showcase something beautiful, something refreshing, and a take that actually, I think, expands upon certain ideas of these cards. Like, this is a great Three of Swords. I love it. I think it really helps unlock some more magic in these cards, but it's not in all of them, and that's okay. Death in this deck, for me, not my favorite. I get where they're going and where they're coming from. Doesn't resonate for me, especially as we're in Scorpio season. Doesn't feel totally resonant. But with that said, this is an 8 out of 10. That's really good. I'm a really picky person. Honestly, it probably should have been an 8.5 or to an almost 9. So if you're looking at getting a deck, I definitely recommend this one. Check out the website or just Google Wayhome Tarot. And Wayhome is one word, so definitely make sure to check them out online. Like I said, it doesn't come with a booklet. I don't think it needs it because honestly, not that hard to read or figure out even if you're new to tarot. But with that said, let's pull one random card and see what it thinks of its review. Or what card to close us out for this video. Yeah, I agree. The Hierophant is the best card in this deck. So with that said, thank you for stopping on this video and checking it out. I'm not very tech savvy or anything like that, but I appreciate you being here to listen to my musings. And happy reading, friends. I hope that you find a deck that you love. I hope you look into maybe an indie deck, because indie decks are by small-time creators that are just out here living their passions and their truth. So please make sure to support those indie creators around you and have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.